our first reader for the second half. She's lived, worked, prayed, played in Evanston throughout her life, so a longtime Evanstonian. She's been a teacher, family education manager, executive director. Right now, our reader, Bettye Cohns. Okay. They usually give us pronouncers in radio so we don't mess up, so thank you. So right now, she is an adjunct professor at Oakton College. Yeah, a longtime institution. And she's very passionate about equitable systems, culturally relevant education, which is something you talked about, Lauren. And she has been the recipient of the Cole McCormick Early Childhood Teaching Award in 2000. Congratulations. Bettye enjoys traveling with family, reading. That's good because you're going to be up here pretty soon. Movies, celebrating their 50th anniversary in 2023. Has it come officially yet? All right. Bettye and David are proud parents of 2 children and 9 grandchildren. So welcome, Bettye Cohns.
Good evening, everyone. I am so happy to be here this evening, sharing my story with you all. But I want to give you a little bit of my family history first. My paternal family is from South Carolina. My father came to Evanston somewhere in the mid-40s, and my maternal grandparents are from Mississippi and Tennessee. And they came here in, I would say the 20s, maybe 30s, early 30s. And they lived in the 5th Ward, my father, as well as my grandparents and my mom. My mother is deaf, and so I did not have anybody reading to me as a child. My father did not go to school. His family were sharecroppers, and he was the 4th out of 16 children. He had to pick cotton to pay for their space, their rent. And my mom, she was very protected and sheltered because she was deaf since the age of 3. So she went to school, but my grandmother in Jacksonville, Illinois, but my grandmother was not comfortable with her being away from her for so long and had her come back home. So when I came along, I'm the oldest of 4. I did not have anybody reading to me, but I had a lot of people telling me oral stories. My grandmother was a minister. She had her own church in the basement. It was called Church of the Living God. If you know where the First Church of Christian Life Center is in Simpson and Evanston, it was right by the alley before the first church expanded. And she told me, she said, if anyone ever asks you what your religion is, you tell them it's metaphysics. I'm like, okay. Now, I did not know if they asked me, well, what is metaphysics? I didn't know what to tell them. But I knew what we did because I was her right hand. Wherever she went, I was her shadow. And then she retired. In fact, she was the matriarch of our family. We lived with her and my grandfather on Simpson Street in the 5th Ward until they retired to Arizona when I was 9. And when she left, she said, you take care of your mom. I said, okay, I will. Now, anything that had to do with our family, she took care of. You know, any paperwork, anything, moving, all of that, she dealt with that. She controlled everything. And we moved we moved before them, but we lived in the south part of Evanston. I went to Central School, which is now Park School, and that was my first experience in school, the first time anybody ever read anything to me. I had a lot of oral stories, Bible stories, of course, My mom would tell me stories about her growing up, which she still does to this day. And my father, he was not as open as my mom was. I had to ask probing questions. So I had a feeling that there are things that happened that he did not want to talk about, but he would share if I asked direct questions. My grandmother, on the other hand, told me all kinds of stories about her growing up, and she was a formidable force to be reckoned with. In fact, my mom, after they retired to Arizona, my mom would always say if I did anything, she was going to tell my grandmother, and I would be terrified. Until I realized that she's in Arizona, I'm in Evanston. How can she do anything to me? So I got over that. But my kindergarten teacher, Miss Finnegan, and my first grade teacher, Miss Bright, used to read stories all the time. And I loved Dick, Jane, and Sally. And Spot too. But what I noticed was that nobody in those stories looked like me. But that's where I developed my love for reading. So when I really learned how to read and felt comfortable reading, I was always in the library. I read every Nancy Drew book there was. I read biographies about whoever there was a biography about. And then I graduated to reading the books on my, I babysat for neighbors in the community. We had a very diverse community living on the south side of Evanston. And I babysat for two little boys, a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old who had, had a different need. He was in a wheelchair, and his single parent, single mom, and she was a server at a restaurant, but she also, was dating. So I was always at her house, and she had books all over the place. And so when I thought about a book that changed my life, the first book that came to my mind was Valley of the Dolls. I was in 7th grade. I'm like, oh, I don't want to be like these women in this book. No drugs for me. Watch out for those men, But I read The Carpetbaggers. I read almost every book on her bookshelf that I thought was interesting to me. And before then, my mom, she used to go, I don't know if any of you are, young enough to remember True Confessions, those magazines that you could get. So she would get them, but I don't know why she got them. She would briefly read through the stories, and I'm not sure if she understood the concept of what was in the story because she let me read them too. And so I was very independent, read the books. They didn't know I read Valley of the Dolls. They didn't know what I was reading. After I graduated from Nancy Drew, I was in a whole nother world. I'm like, okay. But what I realized, my father, he would always ask me to read things. I'm like, he's always making me read this stuff. He would say, what does this say? And I realized he didn't know how to read. So at the time, I was like, oh, this is kind of good because I was in high school by then. He didn't have to see report cards. Things that came home, I would read it to him, the parts I wanted him to hear. Or I would tell him stuff that I did want him to hear, even if it wasn't there. But it really struck me later on when I had to take him to get his driver's license renewed, and he had to do the written test. And I was wondering, we didn't talk about it, because he could do everything else. I mean, people would bring things to him. I brought things to him to fix. He could do anything else. So it didn't seem to impact so much the fact that he couldn't read, because he was very capable. He was functioning. He drove everywhere. But when I took him to get his driver's license renewed, I saw the instructor asking him the questions instead of him doing the written test. And I thought to myself, I should teach him how to read. But I didn't want him to feel embarrassed or ashamed that he didn't know how to read, so I left it alone, and I didn't do it. I just kept reading for him I'm the oldest. My siblings did the same thing. I was talking with my sister who's 15 years younger. She said, yeah, I remember. Daddy used to ask me to read stuff to him too. So that was something that I don't know how he felt about it. I wish I did, because he's passed on now, and I wish we could have a conversation about it. But the book that really impacted my life in the mid-'90s, the year before my father passed, I reconnected with my daughter's daycare director, Mary Pat Martin, who is very much into anti-bias and cultural relevant and meaningful experiences for children. And she said, you know, you need to join our support group. So I said, okay, what do we do? And she said, well, we just meet once a month and we just share our experiences if we choose to, and think about what we can do in the classroom. Now, mind you, a couple of years before that, I was really into Halloween. And one person a parent came to me and she said, you know, I don't think this is good. Everybody doesn't celebrate Halloween. I'm like, oh, but it's so much fun. It's okay, you know, they'll have a great time. But once I started with this support group, I realized that my experiences aren't the same as everyone else's and shouldn't be expected to be the same. So I talked to the director and other staff, and they're like, oh, but it's okay, you know, everybody's doing it. And I'm like, okay, this is not going to be the easiest thing to change people's mind. I said, well, we're excluding those families who don't want to participate. And they said, okay, well, we'll do it on the weekend. That way they don't have to come if they choose not to. And I thought to myself, how can I help them to understand that this is not something that I do during the week or on the weekend and think that we're being inclusive. We're still excluding them even if it's on the weekend. So I said, we need to have conversations. And I started by sharing this book that I had already been using, The Anti-Bias Curriculum, Tools for Empowering Young Children. And it was based out of California with Louise, Derman-Sparks, and the A.B.C. task force. And they have 4 goals that focused on, and it changed my life because I don't think of any other way now without having an automatic anti-bias lens. And the goals, what really struck me was that not only were they for the children, but they were for adults too. So the first goal was helping children feel good about their identity and their group identity. The second goal was helping them to feel good and value the identity of others without feeling inferior or superior to that other group. And the third goal was to be critical thinkers, to think about what's fair and what's not fair. And the fourth goal was feeling empowered to stand up against injustice for themselves or someone else. Because why go through this process if you don't give them a reason or a way to remedy that injustice? So that has always been the premise behind everything I do now. I look at it through an anti-bias lens. And with the children, helping them to develop their confidence, I think that's one thing that as educators, we have to help children gain is confidence about who they are, their interests, that they are capable, that they can be successful, and give them the tools and the support that they need to be able to move forward. This book impacted me so much. It also gave me the language to have the conversation with others sometimes that's hard to do because I always think I'm right. And I do not want, don't argue with me about it. Just listen to what I'm saying and do what I say to do. But I think conversations, it helps me to learn and grow as well because I get to hear other perspectives and other points of view, which is exactly what we want children to be able to do, to see both sides and to be able to make a decision for themselves and feel confident in their decision and to be able to explain it to others. So this book changed my life. Valley of the Dolls informed my life, but this book has changed my life. Thank you.